We're coming live to you, in this case, Zoom live, from the beautiful campus of the University of St. Thomas in the heart of Houston, your Catholic urban university, for a dialogue series entitled, For Such a Time as This, Houston 2036. Now we know embedded in the name of our great city, Houston, right in the middle, is UST. So it's really UST 2036, for such a time as this. We'll be examining each week the current issues of our day through the very important lens and frame of Catholic social teaching and social justice. We'll dialogue with our guests each week concerning the number one question yet to be answered for our thought leaders to address. What is the great moral ethical question? What is the fair and ethical treatment of all human beings? All human beings' lives matter. All human beings are equal. We're going to ask Houstonians going forward, what is your number one aspirational goal for Houston by 2036? And why 2036? The 200th anniversary of the city of Houston is in 2036. Our great university, University of St. Thomas, will be celebrating its 89th anniversary on the road to its 100th anniversary. We want to work backwards along this journey, along this timeline to 2036, to begin to talk about the dream of Dr. Martin Luther King of the beloved community. How do we make the dream of the beloved community a reality? What are those realities that we begin to address today, even in a post-George Floyd world? To be able to look at those social, economic, and political realities that affect our lives. Where do we go from here through dialogue and discernment? Talk about systems change and systemic change. Talk about our common humanity, our equality, our solidarity. We have been blessed here in Houston for over 39 years, soon to be 40, with something called the Houston Annual Area Survey, done by our great friend, Dr. Stephen Klineberg at Rice University Kinder Institute, who've now put this all together in a wonderful book, all 319 pages of it, entitled Houston on the Cusp of a Changing America, Prophetic City. It is really, I even actually call it the Bible the other day, Steve, which means basic instructions before leaving Earth, but sometimes means basic instructions before leading education, the Bible, because in it, it talks about the transformation of Houston through the first early chapters from the public receptions of Houston, chapter 1, 2, and 3, to confronting the new economy, chapters 4, 5, and 6, to the diversity revolution, 7, 8, and 9, and then it talks about the great demographic transformation. And that's kind of where I want to pick up on, because going forward, it is about that demographic transformation of the new face of Houston, the new future workforce of Houston, that Hispanic reality of the young people and who need to be educated. I'm gonna stop there because this is where Dr. Klineberg comes in. Steve Klineberg, and in my case, after 40 some years of almost knowing him, Steve, just so happy, my friend, to have you here and to have you joining us. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Larry, so much. Great to be with you as always. And great to have a conversation about these critical issues.
Let's pick up on that. There's this great demographic transformation that you've been telling us is coming, is coming, is coming. It's here now. And I remember actually you said this, you've had some people who kept saying, well, no, that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen to the extent. It has happened. It is irreversible. It is here. Right. We are a majority minority. We are a majority minority city. All those things. Right. But tell us what that means in reality.
Yeah. No, you bet. Well, let's back up for a second. The story of America is that between 1492 and 1965, 82% of all the human beings on the face of this earth who came to American shores came from Europe. We were operating on one of those viciously racist laws that closed the world, closed America to anyone but Northern Europeans. The law was changed in 1965 and we become a nation of immigrants again. And 88% of all the new immigration coming into America since 1965 is coming from Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Caribbean. And the United States, that throughout all of our history had been an amalgam of European nationalities, is becoming a microcosm of the world. The first nation in the history of the world that can say we are a free people and we come from everywhere. all of God's children, all now gathering together in one remarkable country. And Houston is at the forefront of that transformation. This was a biracial southern city dominated and controlled by white men throughout all of its history. And during the oil boom years, it was Anglos pouring into Houston in the 1960s and 70s. This is where the jobs were. After the oil bust of 1982, the Anglo population stopped growing, and all the growth of this, the most rapidly growing city in America, has been the influx of African Americans, Latinos, and Asians. And this biracial southern city dominated by white men has become the single most ethnically diverse major metropolitan area in the country. And the other piece of this is that we are there first. The census projects, because it's the story of America is the aging of Anglos and the young people disproportionately non-Anglo across the country. By 2050, all of America will look like Houston looks today. We are there first. How we navigate this transition to build a truly successful, inclusive, equitable, united, multi-ethnic society will have enormous significance, not just for the Houston future, but for the American future. This is where, for better or worse, the American future is going to be worked out. So this whole transformation and the way we are dealing with this and thinking about it and building relationships and failing to or succeeding in making the investments that we need to make are all going to be part of the story of Houston and America as the 21st century unfolds.
Well, you know where I'm headed next with my next question,
Okay.
because it's in your book on page 125. This question of diversity that I think has been and is an asset has also, in some ways, I think, been a crutch. Yes, we are diverse. We are the most diverse, as you said. We will fall over our diversity. We'll trip over diversity in this city. But yet we're also one of the most segregated communities economically. We're one of the most gated communities in America, if not the #1 gated community in America. And we've seemed to have gotten along with each other with this sense of what I call tolerance, of just kind of tolerating each other, still living in our own conclaves and enclaves, still living somewhat in silos. You can go your whole day, your whole week in Houston and never see the other, never encounter the other in certain parts of Houston. The question I have is, how do we move that bar from tolerance to acceptance to inclusion of the other who may be different than myself, who does not look like me, which is now the majority of people. If you shift the paradigm, there's only one minority group, and that's the Anglos. But even that doesn't really say it, because you and I have had this conversation lots of times. It's really about inclusion, right? And how do we get to that inclusion? The words I use is moving from pluralism. Moving from diversity to pluralism. In a pluralistic society, everybody counts just because they're a human being. No other labels or titles needed. But that's a journey. That's a road. How do we get there?
Well, I know we have had this discussion, and I'm more optimistic than you are, because my sense is that you can watch in our surveys, right? Every year we ask identical questions about, do you think the increasing ethnic diversity in Houston will be a source of great strength for the city or a growing problem? Should we admit more, the same number or fewer legal immigrants in the next 10 years than the last 10? All the measures we have of comfort with diversity and support for immigration are changing in the increasingly accepting direction, increasing direction of celebration of that diversity. So we're moving in the right direction, clearly, in Houston, and the surveys show that. But we've come out of we're a deeply segregated, racist country and city, and enormous inequalities predicated above all else on access to quality education. And the segregation in schools is even greater than the segregation in housing, and it's all the process of still feeling comfortable living in communities made up of PLUs, as the Wall Street Journal once called it, people like us. We want to be in those worlds. So there's tremendous challenge, but we're also watching there are reasons for optimism as we go forward. Another reason, and I'll get back to you, is we are falling in love with each other, marrying, making multiracial babies in a way we've seen before in American history. Of all the married Latinos in Harris County, Texas today, 28% are married to non-Latinos. Of all the marriages in the United States involving an Asian in the last 3 years, 1/3 involve a non-Asian. There's been an 800% increase in black-white marriages between 1990 and 2010. Younger Anglos are taking for granted this diversity and comfortable with it in a way that we older Anglos are not, right? There's that law of human nature that says what I'm familiar with feels right and natural. What I'm unfamiliar with feels so it feels unnatural and somehow not quite right. As I say, every measure we have of Anglo attitudes shows this pattern with age. Younger Anglos are far more supportive of this diversity, far more embracing of the changes than we older Anglos who grew up in the 60s and 70s, which was a different world in America than the 1990s and 2000s. So there's a kind of inevitable demographic destiny that's operating here that you can see happening in people's attitudes. We're not there yet. There's tremendous inequalities, and especially the great challenge of education that you know better than any of us is absolutely central to to what degree are we preparing this next generation for success in the jobs of the 21st century. But there's room for some optimism here. There's room for some energizing of all of us to recognize there's an historical trend that we need to enhance and build on, because the destiny of Houston and America is to be a microcosm of all the world's peoples, of all the world's ethnicities, all the world's religions gathered together in one remarkable place. So
I'm a prayerful optimistic. I've always been a prayerful optimistic.
I know you have.
Which makes me somewhat of a realist most of the time. But I have to ask the question, and you're absolutely right. But in the resegregated school districts that we find ourselves now,
right,
in the totally resegregated school districts, HISD is a good example. What the challenge I think we're going to have going forward, I know we're going to have, is quality education for all, yada, yada, yada. But we talk about the need of our future workforce. We talk about these young people being that future workforce. We give lip service to the things we should be doing to achieve those goals, but we still have children stuck in these schools. The majority of kids are in public schools, not private schools, parochial schools, or charter schools, but public schools.
right.
And if we don't do something about that, we're not going to have that bright reality that we keep talking about that we need and want. Is it the time now in this post-George Floyd reality to realize that the issue of implicit bias is really the #1 thing that keeps us from doing the right thing? We say the right thing, but there's a difference between saying the right thing and doing the right thing.
Yeah, and it's really systemic racism. It's
yes,
into the structure. So it's not individual positive feelings. It's the fact of isolating poor folks in inadequate schools and overcrowded inner city schools with all housing problems and access to quality food and support systems that are so critical in helping people succeed in school. And it's that segregation in this education system that is a key factor. It's the fact that Anglo kids in Houston start kindergarten 1.5 to 2 years ahead of poor kids, because they have quality preschool education, and most poor children in Houston don't have access to quality education. One quick example is Fort Bend County, which I always tout as maybe the most ethnically diverse county on this planet. Fort Bend County today is 21% Asian, 20% Latino, 20% African American, 24% Latino, 34% Anglo. Hard to get much closer to 1/4, 1/4, 1/4 of all of us. But you go to the schools and they are overwhelmingly Anglo and Asian or Black and Latino, right? And that segregation, that separation, it's a separation at least as much by class as it is by ethnicity. But because we come out of this racist realities of the past, those are massively intercorrelated, and it's the great challenge. One other piece that I keep reminding people of is the demographics of Houston, Texas, right? Of everybody in Harris County under the age of 20, across, not HISD, not inner city Houston, but of all the 4.8 million who live in Harris County, of the 1.4 million who are under the age of 20, who will be the workers and taxpayers and citizens and voters of Houston in the 21st century, of everybody under the age of 20, 51% are Latinos, 19% are African Americans, 9% are Asians, 21% of everybody under 20 is Anglo. So 70% of all the young people in Harris County, Texas today are African American and Latino, the two groups most likely to be living in poverty. We know what poverty does to your ability to succeed in the public schools. It is a safe statement to make that if Houston's African American and Latino young people are unprepared to succeed in the global knowledge economy of the 21st century, it is difficult, if not impossible, to envision a prosperous future for Houston. That is who we are and will be. And what you watch in Houston is a growing recognition of that, but not yet the willingness to make the sustained investments that will ensure that the young people of Houston are prepared to succeed in the global knowledge economy of the 21st century.
So Steve, I have to ask, since you started off that whole wonderful discussion that you just did, which I really totally agree with, about systemic change and systemic racism and systematic racism, is it time for the wisdom community of you and I and others like us to step aside? And because when you talk about systems change, let's just do a quick little 3-point thing on systems change. What is a system? An organized body of people gathered around values, structures, and individuals. Values are defined, structures are put in place to implement systems, people identified to maintain structure and institutions. Systemic change occurs when values, structures, and individuals change. So obviously, if we're going to get to that change, of systemic change, we have to do some major shifts in all three categories, in structures, individuals, and systems. And maybe the people in the human beings, the individual persons who call themselves human beings, I don't mean that as a negative, that's the reality, who aren't ready to invest the type of not only money, but change in the system to educate the future workforce. Maybe it's time we look at policy change, eradication. Something has to happen. We've tried to do it in fine-tuning, and you and I know, we make little stabs at it, we make forays into it, we do some little fine-tuning around the edges and the corners, but we never get to the heart of it. We never get to the real issue. As they say, the question behind the questions never get asked, let alone answered, as to what's holding us back. What's the hesitation? Where is the lack? Why is there a lack of will and wanna to do what everyone says has to happen? You said it's not optional.
Right.
That's your word. It's not optional. So what holds us back from knowing that this is a reality for us going forward, or we have no future? That's the piece that keeps coming back. And when I do these focus groups and town hall meetings, that's the piece that keeps coming back. Well, Larry, what's the problem?
Yeah, and what you keep reminding is the fierce urgency of now.
Right.
Urgency of now. It's if we can't afford to let another generation go through the system unprepared to succeed in the new economy, and that's you're on target. I mean, that's the great question for Houston's future. I end the book saying about Houston, the jury is out. We understand and see these realities more clearly than we did 5 and 10 years ago, but we're not yet walking the walk. We're not yet putting the resources in and sustaining them. And the general public has shifted in its understanding of these issues in ways that are dramatic. The real question is, can we build on those changes? Can the leadership of this city help move us forward to make those investments and ensure that this next generation?
Do we not have some of the right people in place? I mean, is it a question of, we have great leaders, we have great thought leaders, we have very humble people who are sincere in our philanthropy, in our corporations, in our public sector, but yet for some reason, something is not happening. Is it time maybe to look at those people needing to be replaced, not only with younger people, but perhaps a different set of people of color? If that's the reality of all organizations who are run, you look at boardrooms, you look at people in power, it is still an Anglo-driven, almost totally Anglo-driven, and older even Anglo-driven, male-driven reality of Houston from every position, every position just about. Now, I have nothing against any of those human beings. I'm being very serious. I happen to know them. I happen to have the relationships built with them over years of trust and respect. I understand them. I know where they're coming from. I can get things done with them. But that's not true of the bulk of people in society. And because that little dawning statistics you just said a minute ago, 70% of everyone under the age of 20 years old is a person of color. All right? And then the other statistic you usually give that 30% of the Anglos over 65, or whatever the other number is that you give.
It's not until you reach, it's not, the other one is that it's not until you reach people age 63 or older in all of Harris County that the majority of folks are Anglos.
Okay.
And each age group, the percentage of Anglos. So there's an inevitability to this demographic transformation, but there's not an inevitability to the investments that are going to be needed.
Because the power still resides with that small minority. And power being money, power being prestige, power being leverage, power being all the definitions of power. And so we understand that the power still resides with that group, but demographically the number there, when you talk about them as citizens, as constituents, as voters, the numbers therefore are on that other side, right? The majority has the numbers, but here's what I know about numbers. Just having large numbers without being organized by numbers doesn't get you anything.
Right. Well, we are in the midst of a fundamental transformation, right? We come out of a world where white males dominated entirely the whole system. That was the America of that whole period, and they made those structures. And we have come out of an economy where education was never important or necessary. You made money in Houston and in Texas by land, by exploiting all the things you could do on the land. The big Texas fortunes were made from cotton, timber, cattle, oil. You didn't need education to make money in Texas. Now you do. Now we're in a new global economy, a new knowledge-based economy. And we're used to have the lowest possible taxes of any city in the country. There's that saying that nothing fails like success. We were so successful during the oil boom years with the radical ideology of minimum government, minimum regulations, minimum attention. Making the rich richer helps everybody. And now we're in a new world. And so you've got a period of real transformation and challenge. And that's why it's such a challenging thing in Houston, because people have come out of a world where the ideology of minimum government, minimum investments worked beautifully. So my sense is that meanwhile, you and I both know every time we talk to groups of leaders in Houston, it's not as entirely white male as it used to be. Every year, there are gradual transformations going on, and the demographics tell us it's inevitable and necessary. And younger Anglos are more comfortable with this, but many older Anglos are embracing this diversity.
Right. But in the post-George Floyd world, we keep talking about it's not enough to be a non-racist. To be a non-racist, you got to be an anti-racist. And anti-racist means you have to stand up, show up, speak up, challenge things, challenge people, challenge institutions, do it lovingly. That's always my word, do it lovingly, but nonetheless, you still have to challenge.
Dismantle the structures.
Exactly, because the conversation you and I had a few years ago about power, just what does it mean to be empowered? And the empowered is the ability to, power is the ability, capacity, and willingness of a person or a group of people to act. People are with us. We know they're with us. They say they're with us. They'll stand with us. They'll march with us. They'll show up at the meeting with us, but the action doesn't follow. The behavior, I can only judge you by your behaviors, not your words.
That's what makes this city so interesting and so important, is because the jury is out. We don't know yet whether the forces pushing people toward making these fairly radical commitments and strengthening the structures of opportunity in the city are going to win out over inertia, over selfishness, over traditional ways of thinking about the world that will lead us to create another generation unprepared for the jobs in the 21st century when the real challenge for the future of Houston and America ultimately is not so much an ethnic divide as a class divide.
Right. So is it a new civic lesson we need to learn?
So we have trouble talking about race. We have even more trouble talking about class.
Right. So in the civic society, you and I have talked about this again. It's, the I and me and the we and us people. The 5 tenets of what it means to be a citizen living in a democracy. We love to talk about 2 of those 5, my individual rights and privileges. That's the great I and me. I'll talk about that all day. The other 3, my common duties, obligations, responsibilities to the other, defined differently than me. But that's the we and us. And somehow we've never been able to get to we and us. And I think that we see it played out now in so many ways, the lack of being a country, a society of we and us. This individualist thing is driving us apart more and more every day. Even about who wears masks, who gets to be told to wear a mask. Why should I wear a mask? Well, you don't wear a mask for yourself. You wear your mask for others because you're part of a democratic society. All those things get played out. And so you and I love talking to a sociologist about this. The only other person better to talk about this with is a theologian other than a sociologist. Is because it really is about how human beings interact with other human beings. Is it not, Steve? In the end of the day, my only litmus paper test I have is the old phrase, don't tell me you love me, just show me you love me. Use words only if necessary. I can only judge by your action and behavior.
Yeah, well, that's why we love you so much, Larry. Those are just tremendously important reminders of what this is about. But all I want to add to that is progress is being made. We are,
yes.
we're much more embracing of a multi-ethnic society than we ever were before. We're much more aware of the importance of education. One of the key questions in our surveys was, do you think, or which of these statements come closest to your feelings about the public schools? The schools have enough money if it was used wisely to provide a quality education, or the schools will need significantly more money to provide a quality education if it was used wisely, right? The majority of folks in the 90s said they got all the money they need in the school system that's being wasted. Then it was a 50-50 split during the first decade of the 21st century. Came back this year and 2 years ago, 55% now said to 30% saying the schools will need significantly more money to provide a quality education. That's a sea change in the general public's understanding. And so we're making progress. We're moving in the right direction. The jury is out, but there's room for some sense that there's a destiny here, and there's a direction of justice and of the future, and we need, our responsibility is to help move that along more rapidly than it otherwise would. But there is a sense of direction, a sense of movement.
So as you get ready to do your 40th annual survey, the last one was done right before COVID-19.
Yes.
And so there's going to be a different reality, a different set of questions, a different world. It was done before George Floyd. So I'm looking forward to this next survey, because the survey questions obviously will pick up and reflect the reality of all the things that's happening in society and Houston since then.
Well, I'm sure.
And I think that will be the one that will kind of help us figure out where the bar is moving to and where the bar needs to be moved.
Right. Well, every year we get a picture of what kind of direction are we moving into. It will be very interesting next year when our last survey this year was conducted on March 12th. And
right.
On March 16th was when the pandemic hit in Houston.
When the bottom fell out, yes.
The bars and the restaurants were closed. So we're going back with some of the identical questions in January and February of 2021. A real opportunity to measure how much have we been changed by the pandemic, by the shutdown in the economy, by the collapse of oil prices, and by what you were touching on, this a shift I think that has happened after the George Floyd event, of watching the murder of an innocent black man under the foot of a white police officer. And what was striking there was in the protests and it was not blacks protesting, it was everybody protesting. It was all of us together saying, no, this is not America. This is not what we're going to be willing to allow to happen. And that recognition that all of us are in this together is, I think, a new phenomenon. This may have really made it one of the changes that allow America to take the critical steps forward in the new direction. We'll see, but there's all I pleading for is room to recognize positive movement that has occurred, even though so much more needs to be done if we're going to be able to be successful as we go forward.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Steve. I mean, you and I have been at this for a long, long time. I don't disagree with anything you said. I think it's all true in context. But here's what I love about our dialogues over the years, and there's been so many of them, we've both lost track. We both always are very presenting it from our perspective. Our perspective, opinion, and viewpoint are different daily lives, experiential realities that impact how we see and understand things. But we always use the same data, the same facts, and the same information, which is important, and the same statistics. Because that's where it always falls down. We're all entitled to our own opinion, perspective, and viewpoint, but not our own facts, not our own data, and not our own statistics. And I think that's the world we're living in going forward. So let me close with this, and I'll give you a chance to make a closing statement also. There are three things I think that we can pick up that have been with us since the civil rights movement about how we engage now in this post-George Floyd environment. Those three things is the realization and the reality that different is different, amen, period. Not better than, not more than, not less than, just different. Different is different, amen, period, because we're all different as human beings. We all have a different history. We all have different stories to tell. We all have different stories along life's journeys. Steve and I have talked about our differences, where we come from, how we grew up, who we were around when we were growing up, how we were socialized, etc. I've told him a story of growing up with the Klan. If you grow up with the Klan, that shapes your life in a different way than you can ever imagine going forward. So different is different, amen, period. Our daily lived experiential realities are just different from each other, not better than, not more than, not less than. Number one. Number two, we have to realize always to be aggressive to the issue and reconciliatory to the person involved in the issue. Aggressive to the issue, aggressive as necessary to the issue, but always as reconciliatory as possible to the person involved in the issue. It is not about the person, it is about the issue. It is not about the person, it's about the policy. It is not about, because we got to separate those two to talk about humanity and to talk about moving the bar forward. And lastly, what a person of color knows from day one, from slavery to today, this last one has never changed. The master never gets tired of being the master. It is therefore always incumbent upon the oppressed one to initiate change. Never in the history has the master ever gave up power, ever gave up white privilege without being challenged to do so. There's something about that thing that we go back from slavery to now, and I'll end with this. That officer in Minnesota who had his knee on the neck of that gentleman, that human being, he didn't have his knee on the neck of a gentleman or a human being or a person. He had his knee on the neck of a thing, a non-human, a less than human, a subhuman, a piece of property, an it that goes back to slavery. Because you cannot do what he did to a human being. You only can do that to something you see as less than human. And so the thing that I think we have to understand, slavery has produced all these years now of how people understand. Remember, Black people, even in the Constitution, was only 3/5 of a person. Only 3/5 of a person. Now, how in the world did that ever happen, that you deem a human being as only being 3/5 of a human being? So the way we have come to this day, all these years of history of socialization, of racism, prejudice, discrimination, through Jim Crow, through segregation, through Reconstruction, through integration, now segregation, now resegregation, now again, has led to that officer in the cold, callous way that you saw him do what he did. That was not a human being under his knee. That was a less than subhuman. So you can do that to something you deem as less than a human being. And so I think we have to really take all that into consideration now going forward to my good friend Steve's comment. There is hope. There is optimism. There is change. There is movement on the bar. But the movement of the bar going forward has to be based on reality. It has to be based on the current situations of how we got here. And we've never want to even deal with slavery, never want to talk about racism, never want to talk about race, never want to talk about what we have to talk about it. Because it's so ingrained in everything that's going on right now, you cannot separate it anymore. I'll leave it at that. Steve, give us some closing comments and we're out of here.
Okay. Well, Larry, I agree with all of what you say also. I mean, this is the remarkable moment that we're living in, when you've got all of this history coming in one direction and forces for positive change coming in the opposite direction, and they're meeting. And I just want to reiterate what I was saying, that I think you agree with also, that it's hard not to be at least somewhat optimistic.
Yeah.
And about America, because we are able to learn, and you can see the this embrace of what Houston has become that is just striking, I think, in the general public's attitudes toward the city, toward the diversity. So I remain, skeptical but optimistic about how we're going to address this. And the voice that you bring to this is just so important in reminding us that we have lots of work to do to build that beloved kingdom that we talk about.
Well, thank you, Steve. And we're going to work together on the beloved community becoming a reality here in Houston. I appreciate you. I love you. I thank you always for your wisdom and guidance. I thank you for your friendship over the years. And this relationship we have of mutual trust and respect is what allows us to have these kind of conversations with each other, these critical conversations, and understand that we have to have more like this. We have to do these. These are not optional between people of different backgrounds to be able to do these. And closes out with that wonderful, I love that saying, give me my Wei Ji saying, the Chinese symbol, because I think that's exactly where we are. I think we're exactly on the head of that symbol.
Yeah, Wei Ji, the way the Chinese language renders the word for crisis. The word for crisis consists of these two characters, one signifying danger and the other opportunity. Not a bad way to think about this remarkable coming together of forces that have transformed our city and our state and our country before our eyes, and provide enormous opportunity if we do it right, and deep dangers if we fail to act in the ways that we need to. So it is a beautiful way to remind us of that sitting at that knife edge where we can go in either direction.
It's on us, right? It's on us.
It's on all of us.
It's on us to do it right or to mess it up. Either way, it's on us. You can't blame anybody else and point fingers. All right, we're going to get out of here. We could go on for this for a few hours. Steve, this is the beginning of an ongoing new dialogue.
Yeah, fantastic.
Because we have to do it, and we have to involve more people in it as we go forward. I want to thank you very much, as always, for being with us. We're going to continue this. Thank you, Darnell Miller, University of St. Thomas, and a special thanks to Dr. Ludwig, who kicked us off in the first series of this a few weeks ago. Really set the tone and the bar for this. We're going to be doing these in conjunction with the University of St. Thomas. I'm also tying in the Houston Public Library, the Institute for Spirituality and Health. There's going to be a great partnership. The Nestle Center on the campus of the University of Faith and Culture will be part of it going forward. We have a wonderful PhD program in ethical leadership on the campus. We're going to bring that into it also, because that's where social justice gets talked about more than anything else. And until then, as always, stay safe, be well. Until we see you next time, peace, power, and love.